really deep down, I had no idea what to expect from you with Oasis. So.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, Cramser, back for another week of music ranking, and this week we are covering 90s Britpop, alt-rock superstars, Oasis. For a brief time there in the early to mid 90s, they were arguably the biggest band in the world. They've got 7 studio albums. You guys want to say a little bit about where you're coming from with Oasis?
Just a note, we're not doing the master plan. I know a couple of people asked us about that. It's a B-side collection. Would be probably towards the top of my list had we included it. Yeah, real quick. Don't really like Oasis that much, except for a couple of albums, and really just a couple of songs on those albums. I think Liam's voice is really nagging and irritating, and I think they're kind of a one-trick pony. They're like AC/DC of the 90s for me, where they know how to write 4 different songs, and that's it, and they just kind of repackage them and recycle them over and over. That's kind of how I feel. I'm not too impressed.
That's not entirely inaccurate. I kind of like that description by you, Cramser. They don't have a lot of different dynamics. It is sort of that wall of sound coming at you, 500 overdubbed guitars, and I guess, you can take it or leave it. I personally like them. I thought everyone liked them. Everyone in Britain seems to like them, so probably won't go over too well with our British viewers. Cramser, they'll probably call you out on this one. But I don't know. I mean, after their first 2 albums, hit or miss for me. They had a lot of promise. I think maybe they didn't live up to it. They were, I don't know, what the Strokes of the 90s, just tons and tons of promise, the hottest band in the world, and they sold a ton of records in Britain. They are one of the most popular British bands ever. They're a huge deal over there, so it'll be interesting to see what our British fans kind of feel about Oasis, because, I don't know, Americans didn't quite get them the same way Britain did, so it'll be interesting to see.
It's worth saying for anyone that's not aware that we are doing Oasis because they won our Britpop poll. We had them up against Blur, Suede, and Pulp, and not surprisingly, Oasis kind of ran away with it, with Blur in a close second and Pulp and Suede very, very distant third and fourth. I thought with our audience, maybe Blur had a chance, but kind of played out the way you would have expected it to. For me, there was a time, there's a lot of major rock bands, as people are finding out that watch the channel regularly, that I'm not really that big of a fan of. Either I don't like them at all, or I just don't really care that much about them. Oasis, for a long time, was one of the bands that I did not like at all. I reversed that stance quite a while ago, over a decade ago, so that I've softened up on them, and I enjoyed going through it this time again as well. I had heard all of these albums before, some of them more than others. Probably was the least familiar with like Standing on the Shoulders of Giants and Heathen Chemistry, but the rest I knew fairly well. I agree with Cram that they are kind of a one-trick pony, and that's their biggest probably downside, but I think, they, within that one sort of sound, they do find variations from time to time that are interesting and cool. So I think there's at least something on pretty much all their albums that I enjoy. I get into the ranking?
I'll start it off. My number 7 is going to be Standing on the Shoulder of Giants. I mean, the complaints I'm going to have about this are going to be similar complaints to all the other stuff, kind of what I alluded to at the beginning. I don't think they have a lot of talent. I think, they have some good songwriting here and there. Also, just doing the listography was really tough for me because I can listen to some of the songs I really like off the first few albums I can get into, but going through a lousy Oasis album is really hard for me. You get that sort of lazy beat that's on every other song, and he just holds out those flat notes, and it's just really uncomfortable for me to listen to. This one is kind of a weird direction for it. It doesn't have that classic, just like British rock and roll, pub rock style that they had originally. They're playing off of what they're kind of building on Be Here Now. It's got, we've talked about it so much, that early 2000s European electronic rock vibe to it. Doesn't work at all here. There is some kind of cool sounds on it. Like I think there's an electric sitar, especially like on the song Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is. But yeah, there's not really even 30 seconds of good songwriting here. It's kind of like a wannabe late period Beatles album to me, where they wanted to get, head out east into the Eastern Hemisphere and find out if they had the chops to kind of do their Sgt. Pepper, and they don't for me. Go Let It Out, not terrible. That's the best I can say for it. Number 7, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants.
Wow, that is some harsh words. I did not expect that. For me, I mean, Oasis, the worst thing I can say about Oasis is that they're just not, different. They don't explore enough territory for me. But even I think at their worst, for me, it's sort of like, okay, that's a pleasant song. I mean, that's fine. So my 7th is going to be Heathen Chemistry. I think this is probably just their worst cycle of songs. This came out 2002, and they were kind of, people were down on Oasis, I think, at this point, after Be Here Now and Standing on the Shoulder of Giants kind of failed to live up to expectations. And this one just kind of sounds like a band that doesn't know what they want to do. Hindu Times, I think, is good. Stop Crying Your Heart Out is kind of just too early 2000s for me. I'm not a big fan of that one. And the rest of the songs just don't have anything interesting to say, I think. It's just kind of a boring album. Doesn't break any new sonic ground or anything like that. A little overproduced, a little generic, but it's an okay album. It's my least favorite Oasis, but it's not terrible. It's just average, I think. It's their most average album.
Yeah. Heathen Chemistry is also at the bottom for me. It's kind of generic, not interesting. They get a lot of criticism for sounding a lot like the Beatles at times, and there's times where they kind of rip off T-Rex, and they have all these influences that they wear on their sleeves, and that really doesn't bother me that much. What does bother me is when they kind of rip themselves off and they recycle things that, like, melodies and chord progressions. There's a part of Stop Crying Your Heart Out that sounds exactly like Don't Look Back in Anger, so that bothers me. The album opens with 3 kind of unmemorable rock songs, and then it sinks into just like 5 in a row of these really like bland ballady type songs. I don't know. It's I think an easy last place.
Oof. It's higher on my list, but I share the same loathsome appeal that you guys do, and because I thought it was so bad, I thought it might be Jason's winner. But it was not. Good call that they even kind of recycle themselves. Like a lot of their songs, you're not sure if it's a song you've heard before. I don't know how many songs have that lead guitar part that just goes like, it's just every other song has that in it. So yeah, I agree. Number 6 for me is going to be Don't Believe the Truth. Yeah, kind of more of the same. Production is a little bit better, and that psychedelic nature they're kind of going for is reined in. But there's nothing like, the strength that I have, I think, is just kind of their pop sensibilities, and they do those 4 songs well, and once they ran out of it, they ran out. So there's nothing really melodic on this. All the catchiness is gone. Mucky Fingers is almost a good rock song, but it lacks a little bit of intensity. I think they just I know it's kind of their style is to be the I don't give a fuck, a laziness attitude of the 90s, like the slacker vibe, but doesn't really translate into anything that gets me going ever musically. And the song Lila is just like a drilling in the side of my head with just awful guitar strumming on it. I can't take it. No flavor on this album at all. It's just got a little bit better production, and some of the playing and some of the drumming is better on this. Oh, and part of the cue is one of my favorites on this album. Definitely my favorite on this album. I usually prefer when Noel sings, to be honest. So, a little bit better than Standing Up on the Shoulder of Giants, but still a hard pass for me.
Well, you guys are talking about recycling ideas, which brings me to number 6, Be Here Now, which is literally just the first 2 albums recycled in worse ways. It's not, maybe it should have been, it's not the worst. When it came out, people really dug it. A lot of critical acclaim. Then they realized that they were just sucking up to the Gallaghers to get them to appear in their magazines, basically, because the sort of reassessment of this album, just people trashed it. If you look at reviews now, Noel Gallagher himself thinks it sucks. And it doesn't suck, but like you were saying on Heathen Chemistry, Jason, like there's a couple songs on here, literally I thought it was turning back into Don't Look Back in Anger. Like literally the same guitar, that guitar riff that comes in right before the big chorus. And it happens like 3 different times on this album. The songs are all like 7 minutes long, which makes no sense. This is not a band that should be rocking out, 9-minute version of All Around the World. Like that's just ludicrous. They were on a lot of cocaine when they wrote this. So that kind of makes sense. After something that I consider great, like What's the Story, Morning Glory, that they would come out with this, that basically just torpedoed their entire success. Totally bombed in America. So not a great album. Probably not as bad as I'm making it seem. Like the songs are okay. Like there's a lot of decent songs on here, but they're just too long. It's mixed weird. There's like no bass at all. And it's just sort of, they were on top of the world. They needed somebody to come in and be like, let's, pare this down a little bit. Let's redo some of this stuff. And I think they were just, it's the Gallaghers, so they're just going to be total kind of a-holes. And I think this is sort of their comeuppance for trying to be, a-holes all the time. Like you have to pare it back a little bit, and they needed some sort of parental guidance or something on this one.
My number 6 is going to be Dig Out Your Soul, their final studio album, and I like this a lot more than Heathen Chemistry. I've got pretty much positive things to say about all of the rest of these. I think they were really kind of onto something right before calling it quits. The last 2 albums, I think, are their best sounding, most varied records. I think they're the most interesting and probably their coolest records in a way. But compared to the record previous to this, which I like a lot more than Cram, I think the songwriting on this is way more of a mixed bag. There's some really good stuff on it, like Waiting for the Rapture, I'm Out of Time, and Falling Down. I like all those songs a lot, but a lot of the rest of the record is just mediocre songwriting-wise, but I think there's still a lot of cool things happening sonically on it. So I would say it's a pretty good record. My number 6.
All right, my number 5, riding Joe's coattails here. Be Here Now pretty much said everything that it needs to be, although it starts off well. I like Do You Know What I Mean? It's this big overdone, like big budget production sound to it, works on this song, and then kind of gets abandoned for the rest of the album, or is put in weird places. And everything else just kind of seems like this weird love child of the first 2 albums that aren't nearly as cool as their parents. It's all kind of leftovers, like songs like Stand By Me and Fading Out and Don't Go Away are just like kind of like stepsisters of the songs from the first 2 albums that sound like that. Just they like this one a little bit more, or they like the ones on the first 2 albums a little bit more. So this fell back to the 3rd album. Yeah, it's really bloated. Nothing really works for me outside of the lead off, and Magic Pie is one of the worst songs I've heard as a human since I've been alive. I really hated it. I went back and re-listened to it just to be like, okay, is my reaction justified? And I can't stand it. And yeah, the biggest problem that it has, Joe's right. Why are literally the math on this is every song is twice as long as it should be. Not just like, that's not hyperbole. Like they should all be cut in half. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. But I do kind of dig some of the production, and it's got a little bit more of the vibe of the first 2 albums, so it's not entirely at the bottom for me. And again, I really like Do You Know What I Mean, so that'll probably make my songs list. But number 5, Be Here Now.
My number 5 is going to be Dig Out Your Soul. I think this is a really strong start. Half of this album is among their best, I think. Bag It Up, pretty much right until Get Off Your High Horse Lady is kind of classic Oasis, but they're finally sort of exploring new sounds and new directions. It's not quite in their wheelhouse. They are sort of trying new things, and I appreciate that. I think it would have been interesting to see where they went after this, if they'd stay together. I do like some of their solo stuff, so I think they were onto something with this. Shock of the Lightning is sort of a throwback, but I think it's really good. And it's just a little more interesting. It's a good album. It kind of peters out at the end, but definitely interesting. And I think they were onto something, but then they broke up. So we'll never know where they were going, but I think it's a good album. I hold it much higher than Be Here Now or Heathen Chemistry.
My number 5 is Be Here Now. I think you guys said a lot of what there was to say about it. 71 plus minutes is insane. The songs are way too long, but I don't think it really is as bad as its reputation. Aside from the songs being way too long, I don't think the songs are terrible. And some of the highlights from this record for me are among my favorite Oasis songs. I like Stand By Me a lot. I like I Hope, I Think, I Know, Don't Go Away. So, I mean, everything you said is pretty accurate, but I also don't think it's terrible.
Yeah, define terrible, but I think it's pretty bad. So, but I think I'd say that about 4 of the 7 are pretty bad, including this one, Dig Out Your Soul. I'm right behind Joe on these. Definitely deserves the 4 spot compared to the 3 below it. I think it's kind of a bit of a return to form. It's got a little bit more of that youthful charm to it, like that teenage pub rock feel that they got. I like the turning. I like Falling Down a good bit. I think that's like probably the best piece of songwriting they did in the last few albums. But again, I think Noel sings that one, and that's kind of usually where I prefer my Oasis. But yeah, it's still kind of vanilla for me. There's a nice bit of, like I said, that old school return to form, sort of like that drunken, brute boyishness to it. The cockiness is back. So yeah, maybe I'm in agreement with Joe that they were starting to get their stride back a little bit, but still doesn't grip me. Still the thumbs down, just because I don't think the songwriting is really, I don't think they're great songwriters. So not terrible, but not even decent for me. So my number 4, Dig Out Your Soul.
My number 4 is going to be Don't Bleed the Truth. And this is another one where it's not quite that incessant wall of sound. This was their second last one. They kind of sound a little less depressed on this one. There's a little jauntier, a little poppier, a little less jaded, I think, than their first 5. There's nothing on here that I love, but I think it's very solid all the way through. All the songs are fine. Part of the cue is good. I like Lila. I don't know why Cramser hates it so much. It's just a little more interesting, a little less of that sort of just 8,000 guitar layers coming at you, and sort of their renaissance a little bit after the crumminess of Heathen Chemistry. So this was sort of their second shot, and I think it was a good kind of comeback, a interesting style. They kind of kept this going a little bit on Dig Out Your Soul, and I think it's a pretty interesting album. It's a good album. I hadn't heard it before, so this was the first time I've heard this one.
My number 4, the reason it was important for me to talk about the fact that I used to not like Oasis is because that period where I didn't like them sort of left me without holding any of their records on a pedestal, really. So everything was kind of on an even playing field from the start. My number 4 is definitely Maybe. I like a few songs on this a lot. Rock and Roll Star, Live Forever, Slide Away. But I think this record sounds like garbage. The mix is horrible. The guitars sound awful. It's impossible to listen to at a decent volume because you have to keep turning it down to save your eardrums. I don't think, aside from like the real standout tracks, I don't think the songwriting's that great. Yeah, I just don't think this is anywhere close to its reputation. And I think it's decent and there are very good moments on it, but I think it's very overrated.
Well, it's definitely overrated, but it's a runaway for me. But we'll talk about that later. But I'm glad you mentioned that it does sound pretty bad, especially the cymbals and the hi-hat are really bad. But they almost do like pierce your ears if you're listening with headphones. Not very good. All right, but my number 3, we're finally getting into non-really bad albums for me. And that's Heathen Chemistry, which I still don't recommend. It's just decent. And we're probably in this territory where I just dislike Oasis so much that this one is generic enough for me to just kind of like, take it with a spoonful of sugar and I can accept it. And it is pretty generic. A couple of the other band members, I believe, wrote some stuff on it. It's just really kind of basic, like post-grunge rock and roll songs, kind of like 4-minute alternative songwriting by Numbers, songwriting for dummies. But it works a little bit. I like the New Times. Stop Crying Your Heart Out is a little bit overblown. I do like Songbird a good bit. She Is Love isn't bad. And I think it's just a little bit nice that they got away from more of like the weird electronica psychedelic stuff that they were doing on Shoulders of Giants. And yeah, I just kind of think like this simple, basic approach to the music makes it a little bit just easier and a little bit more fun for me than the other stuff, but still not a recommendation. I will recommend the other two, but not this one. Number 3, Heathen Chemistry.
My third, and I think these top 3 are all excellent albums. This one doesn't get a lot of love. I don't really know why. Vaguely remember when it came out, people were just really accusatory, saying it was a ripoff of the Beatles. And I mean, that's fine. That's what you should be doing. If you're going to rip somebody off, if you're going to be compared to the Beatles all your life, you might as well lean into it. And I think on Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, they finally do that. Go Let It Out. It's got those, sort of mystical, magical elements.
Isn't that what they said too? They were like, if you're putting together a rock band and not trying to be the Beatles, then there's no point to it or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally what you should be trying to be. And maybe they go a little overboard sometimes. I mean, Go Let It Out is like real kind of close to the Beatles, but I still think it's a very good song. I think it's very catchy. I want to listen to it. It sounds good, so I don't see the problem with it. They kind of bring in that little psychedelia with something like Gas Panic, Who Feels Love. Little James and Sunday Morning Call sort of, they're definitely trying to be the Beatles. They're trying to be, late period Beatles, like Cramser said. But I think it all works, and I think it all sounds really good. I think they have a lot of talent when they're actually, not fighting and doing coke and stuff like that. So I think this was a very good comeback after Be Here Now, and I think it's, all the way through, it's real solid. And I've liked this one for a while, so it's no surprise that it's third for me. But I just don't know where all the hatred comes from for this one, and I think it's unheralded for sure.
That one is also my number 3. I've got Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. I think there's a lot of really good songs on this record. Go Let It Out, Who Feels Love. I think Where Did It All Go Wrong is awesome. Sunday Morning Call, Roll It Over. I like the direction that they're going on this record. I think they're expanding their sound a little bit from the first 3 records, which were all sort of very similar. The only thing that keeps it down in third place, and in my mind, a weaker album than the other 2 ahead of it, is just a few really kind of clunky songs. I don't like Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is at all. And there's a couple more tracks on the record that I don't really care for that much. But all in all, I think most of this record is very good.
All right, my number 2 is going to be What's the Story, Morning Glory. Album was so big when we were in middle school, I guess it was. Everyone like on the school bus knew the lyrics to Wonderwall and Champagne Supernova. And I like both those songs. Wonderwall, done much better, the Ryan Adams version, but I still like this one. I like Don't Look Back in Anger, although I don't think it belongs in the middle of the album. I think it's perfect for like a farewell to the album. Probably just switch that with Champagne Supernova. I really don't like She's Electric. I know a lot of people love that song. I absolutely can't stand it. It sounds like just such an early Beatles boy band ripoff to me, and it's just annoyingly pretty, and I don't know, I just hate it. Cast No Shadow, I don't care for very much. I don't think you need that and Wonderwall in the album, but I don't really have many problems with much of the other stuff on it. It's just a really good blend of kind of the hard rock nature that was on Definitely Maybe, and then they really put some good pop songwriting prowess on it. So I do recommend it. I think it's a pretty good album with a couple of really good songs on it. Number 2, What's the Story, Morning Glory.
Okay, well, we're to the top 2 already. For me, it's pretty even for these last 2, even though really the top 3 are all pretty darn good. I've definitely Maybe is my number 2, and it's It was probably even better when it came out in 1994 or whatever. Yeah, it's just like a rush. Like it's just walls of guitar and sound coming at you. There's nothing fancy on here. It's sort of, they were always kind of compared with Blur, who was a little more playful, and this is sort of like very working class kind of Brit sound. Rock and roll star is all about dreaming of becoming a rock and roll star to get out of sort of the streets. So it's an interesting look. It's not that sort of charming British style that was kind of popular. I like it a lot. Definitely wear their influences on their sleeves here. Cigarettes and Alcohol sounds a lot like T-Rex. There's a lot of stuff, he's sort of aping John Lennon on a lot of these songs. But I think it's just all good. Every song on this album I think is very good. Even sort of the, stuff like Dixie's Dinner, even the lesser known stuff, Columbia, Up in the Sky. Maybe a tad too long. I don't know why Oasis was in love with like 4 to 6 minute songs. These songs would probably all be 3 to 4 minutes, and I think they'd be even better. But that's really the only critique I have. Live Forever, Supersonic are all great. Slide Away, it's a really good album.
My number 2 is What's the Story? Morning Glory. I think it's got a slightly better mix than Definitely Maybe, but I still don't think it's a very good sounding record. But I think there are way more standout tracks than Definitely Maybe has. Don't Look Back in Anger is great. I like Hey Now. Some Might Say is really cool. She's Electric, I do like. Morning Glory, Champagne Supernova, but there's still, issues with the mix. The snare on Some Might Say is, I don't know if it's out of phase or what, but it makes my ears almost pop. It's really weird. Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of great songs, for sure, but the issues with the sound and, not every track is killer, so that keeps it out of the top spot for me.
All right. My number 1 is the only album I like by Oasis a good bit, and I do like it a good bit. I'd probably give it a 4 out of 5, and that's going to be Definitely Maybe. Yeah, Joe's right. Some of the songs are still a little too long. I like Rock and Roll Star, but the second verse doesn't change at all. It's literally the first verse again, and there's not even like any added musical touches. And that's kind of their thing, is like they're just kind of cocky and lazy at times. And it works on this album because, like Joe was saying, the influences are everywhere. He's singing like Lennon. I think it's interesting to note that why this album, I think, kind of sticks out in this period, or for like 94, is while grunge was going on and everyone obviously had already put the keyboards back in the closet and brought the guitars out and got grungy and rockin' again. They really kind of turn up the blues a little on this album that you don't get with a lot of grunge acts around this time, like Cigarettes and Alcohol and stuff like that. Really kind of go old school in that vein, and I dig it a good bit. It's really straightforward, just that cocky, almost like smug, brutish, like a lot of attitude on this, nothing fancy. Simple rock songwriting that's just all about kind of their style and their flair. And I think pretty much all of the songs work on it. Yeah, the mix isn't very good. The hi-hats are really piercing, and, the low end is almost gone. It's got its issues, but I think the style and the nature of it is really cool and sticks out as a pretty individualistic record for me. But, it's almost like they perfected a little bit of the pop songwriting like they would do on What's the Story, but almost even by the end of this album, they ran out of tricks. It all still kind of seems like for me. So, but a clear number 1 for me, Definitely Maybe, and my favorite Oasis album by a good bit. And I do like it considerably. I will reach for this album a good bit from time to time, but none of the others really.
All right. Crams are finally burying Oasis. For me, the number 1 is clearly What's the Story? Morning Glory. It takes all the lessons, all the kind of wall of sound, all the tricks from Definitely Maybe, and just sort of refines them, makes them a little bit better, a lot more poppy. There's nothing like She's Electric on Definitely Maybe, and I love She's Electric. I think it's phenomenal, super poppy, probably not what anyone was expecting after something like Definitely Maybe, where it's just sort of one speed the whole time, all the time. They definitely mix things up here. Don't Look Back in Anger, phenomenal, just sort of, rock song. Wonderwall, great ballad. I know it's overplayed and kind of douchey because of the acoustic guitar angle, but it's just a really good song. I still like it a lot. I still like Don't Back at Anger a lot. Hello, Roll With It. There's no really weak tracks on here for me. Champagne Supernova is probably the one I least want to listen to ever again, just because it's 7.5 minutes long and it's just a little ponderous. But I think as a whole, this is sort of the definitive Oasis. You know, everybody in America knows it probably, and not anything else. And I think it's justified its sort of place in rock and roll pantheon. It's massive selling in Britain, big selling in America, all over, you know, rock radio. And I think it's just a really good album. They sort of struck gold with this. Never really again, but I think on this one at least they've kind of put all the pieces together and just made a really great British rock album.
Well, you don't have to believe it, but it's the truth. Don't Believe the Truth is the best Oasis album, and I don't think it's even close.
I'd like to just interrupt real quick. Sorry. Cramser texted me before the show, and we like to, you know, try and figure out what Jason's going to pick. He picked Heathen Chemistry, and I picked Don't Believe the Truth. So I'm pretty proud of that one. I nailed it.
You win this round, buddy.
I mean, on this record, there's still all these like classic rock influences, but it's not just the Beatles anymore. They're pulling from all over the history of rock music on this. They kind of keep you guessing as to where the songs are going. I think it's by far their most adventurous record. I think it's their best sounding record, but I still think they keep the hooks and the melody throughout the record. And I don't think any of it really seems forced. I love Mucky Fingers. It's like this Velvet Underground kind of ripoff of Waiting for My Man. Tracks like Love Like a Bomb and Meaning of Life kind of come in the back door with their arrangement. The bass doesn't enter the song until like halfway through on those tracks. I think Importance of Being Idle is great. For my long list, for my top 10 songs, I wrote down 9 of the 11 tracks from this record. I think it's really good the whole way through. And I think for anyone that, you know, didn't follow Oasis all the way to this point, this is really, you know, a good record to check out.
Don't listen. Don't do it to yourself. Don't believe Jason is what I'm saying. You are full of surprises, my friend. I did not think that was coming. Although, to be fair, well, like I said, Heathen Chemistry, but really deep down, I had no idea what to expect from you with Oasis. So
I figured it was up Jason's alley because it was a little more diverse, a little less dour, I think, than the other albums. Had some of those pop flourishes and touches and sort of, didn't just borrow from T-Rex and the Beatles.
You really made it seem like you hated Be Here Now, and I expected it dead last with the way you were talking about it earlier.
It's one where it's like, I don't know. I guess I don't hate it. It's just after something like What's the Story, Morning Glory, and Definitely Maybe, like it's possibly the worst third album in any artist's discography ever for an artist that had that sort of upward trajectory of being the biggest band in the entire world. You know, all they needed was that third album to become legendary, and then they just completely dropped the ball on it. So that's why I probably talked more smack than it deserves. It's just sort of frustrating for me as a music critic to see a band do that.
They got Munson down in the middle of nowhere.
You know?
All right, everybody. Well, let us know how you rank them down in the comments. We will be coming back tomorrow with our top 10 favorite Oasis songs, so keep an eye out for that. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you aren't subscribed yet, hit the bell for notifications, and check in the description for links to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.